Okay, it's Ray again. Welcome back if you clicked on. So I've been watching, I was watching a video a few days ago on YouTube because I don't have enough time to watch Netflix. I know everybody's probably really peeved that I still don't have a Netflix account because I don't watch enough. So my references are all from the YouTube world. Genuinely, I don't have time to watch movies. Okay, so I watched something, and it's a Western commentator, and they were talking about like being really analytical about China again, and then using that oft-repeated mantra of China's wolf warrior diplomacy, and also the need for China to hold face during its negotiations, especially the debacle that we're currently having with the United States and tariffs. Okay, first of all, can we all exercise common sense here? And please, if you guys are still contributing on forums like Quora, Twitter, and all that, please start thinking, especially in terms of your rebuttal. I've seen very few people who answer this way. When people say Asians enjoy face or the necessity of face in Asian culture, that's a normal thing, right? That's a normal thing. Don't admit to it. This is what I find most Asian writers, even if they are so-called advocating for the Asian viewpoint, they will admit to that as though it was a fault, rather than it being common sense and an archetypal human trait. Which country has a group of people that don't need face? I mean, this is what makes etiquette. This is what causes the semblance of a so-called civilization society, is the necessity to give face. Even in quote-unquote savage cultures, right? People need to give face. And that's the whole point of being a human being. So please don't admit that. Please don't say, yeah, Asians do require face. But no buts. White people require face even more. Please look at the Trump administration. Who on earth kisses us in the same sycophantic way that we are currently seeing? With all the Western mainstream media trying to justify his bogus moves to be something like 4D chess, which is something like, oh, he's thinking above everybody else, hence we don't get his stupid antics. No. I'll tell you what Trump is, and mark my word, I mean, I'm an anonymous nobody on the internet, but I'm telling you, he is just basically the decline of the West personified. He is not an aberration in the same way that Hitler was not an aberration. He is basically the result of where Western thought leads finally. It always leads to the same point. And why does Western thought lead to the same point? Is because it only believes in a binary, dualistic point of view of life, but with no gradation in between, right? You have to be bad in order for it to be good. There's no neutral. If you take a look at Dante's Inferno, this is classic Western literature, the one cardinal sin are people who do not take a side. And that's the premise of Western culture. To not take a side is a cardinal sin. Just think about that. So there is no such thing as neutrality in the Western framework. I mean, yeah, in individual people, yes. But as a monolith, no. They only believe in right or wrong, black and white. So it is hard to have any understanding of this particular way of thinking if you are not from that culture. So where do I go back with this whole face thing? When you argue with Western people, Western minds, and that's irrespective of race these days, because a lot of Asians and a lot of black people, by the way, brown people, they adopt this thinking paradigm of things being black and white. So there is no in between, and they argue in the same point. So when you adopt the attitude of saying, yeah, I know Asians want face, but you are using a neutral stance in a fight that only has binaries. So this means you cannot score a point. Does that make sense? In order for you to win at anything, you've got to play the game following the rules. Right now, whether you like it or not, the West is still leading. Because, I mean, I see on the internet all the time, ostensibly, the rise of the global South. And I do believe that. I'm not saying that that's not true. I'm saying it is true because you can see some shifts. But the shift right now is not the end result yet. It is the in-between stage where people are getting used to the new thing, but they haven't really adjusted it. So the arguments still run the gamut of the old arguments. And that being, yeah, the West is not perfect, but it's better than the alternative. And now you have to argue, no, it's not better than the alternative. It is worse. It always has been. Now, the face thing. Okay, which country, which group of people requires the most face in this world? It is white Western people. Just think about it. When the British first colonized and genocided the Aboriginals in Australia, the Indigenous people, they had practices where they were basically chaining 8-year-old Indigenous girls onto farmlands so that they can rape them. But then they turn this situation around. I mean, you can just read this in like the archives. But they turn it around and say that Indigenous men are violent to their women. So what is that? That's a covering of a shadow by claiming that they are the savior when they are in fact the villain. What more of a face requirement to survive in a culture than that? Like there is a little bit of embellishment that people always do. Okay, so sometimes when we look back at our lives, we think we paint certain significant events for our own understanding to be maybe better, the better version, okay? Or at least we rewrite the dialogue in our minds to showcase that it's the better version. Like we convince ourselves that we really stuck up for our rights, blah, blah, blah. But maybe it wasn't that strong. We just felt it was stronger. However, to go against 180 about what you did and then turn the whole story around, what culture does that to the point where there's historical documentation? Which culture keeps on going on about Darwinian theory and that being logical, but without forgetting Francis Galton, which is Darwin's cousin, that talked about racial supremacy and the justification of basically putting black people in manacles and saying that Asians, yeah, they have the ability to think, but simply because they are not white, they do not deserve the same level of equality or recognition. This is also Western thought. Okay, the always oft-repeated claim is that, well, the West, especially through Greek culture, developed the hypothesis, right? So it allows for scientific progress. But think about fundamentally what that actually is. Having a hypothesis and researching it, yeah, it should be in that order. It should be in that order, and rightfully you can conclude right or wrong. However, that's not the way most Western people think. They label a hypothesis first, and then they build a case around to support their hypothesis. So their conclusion is in fact what they deem to be correct. And this hypothesis thing can only work in terms of applied physical laws because they're not subject to subjective interpretation. They are objective. So irrespective of whether you like oxygen or not on a personal scale, you'll need it or else you will perish. That's just a fact. However, a lot of these things called pseudoscience, this for one, this tarot synchronicity by Carl Jung, this is a pseudoscience. Economics is a pseudoscience. Psychology is a pseudoscience. This means it is not 100% on point that you can repeat all the time and get an unfaltering result, right? Now, this is where that hypothesis paradigm breaks down. Please look this up. There's only one group of people who have put a hen on trial and burnt it alive, and because they believed it was a cockatrice, however you want to present it, and that's the West. Because it's a kind of hermaphrodite formation of this particular, I think it was a hen or a rooster, but basically, you know how some women are born with an excess of testosterone, etc., and vice versa, right? That same characteristic exhibited in this hen or chicken, or sorry, not hen or chicken, hen or rooster. And basically, this particular hen was taken to court and subject to a trial, and they found it to be a monster because their Western paradigm scientific theory established that a female hen has these biological characteristics and a rooster has this kind of characteristics. Now that I think of it, I think it was a rooster that laid an egg which triggered this kind of mess. And so they burnt it alive, believing it to be a monster. So this is what I'm saying. This is not following a scientific way of thinking. It is projecting a hypothesis first, and then whatever evidence does not match this, they destroy it. Now, this is why declination was also discovered by the Chinese first. Wait, let me get the exact name so I don't. Okay, so the first Western guy to discover magnetic declination was called Henry Gallibrand in 1634. Okay, so, but what he did, and this story I read in the Grand Titration, so if anybody has that book, you can look this up, was he tried to tinker with the actual instrument because he couldn't believe that it didn't always point true north. So he did that for the longest time before he finally understood there was nothing wrong with the equipment, but it was just a natural phenomenon. And however, contrast that to the Chinese way, which was discovered by a guy with a very, very long name in the 9th century. So let me get so the Chinese guy who discovered it is called Quan Shi Ti Li Chi Ming. Okay, so the difference is this: when the Chinese first discovered that the compass doesn't always point a particular direction, what they did was they didn't actually wiggle the compass. All they did was simply observe, make the observation, record, make the observation and record. Now, what the biggest difference between that is, it leads to the same point finally. It does. Just think about it. Without putting a hypothesis first, but just making an observation and then continuously recording results, you're going to end up with a pattern that becomes discernible over time. But what the West is supposed to do in theory is create a hypothesis and then conduct experiments to either affirm or refute that hypothesis in order to create a scientific theory. But you can derive at this endpoint by two different ways. But the West is quick to say, okay, this is why scientific discovery is discovered by the West, and they call the Eastern or the Chinese system as technology. Like, this is just bona fide stupid. Like, talk about wanting face so much. Just think about that. Putting the hypothesis first of all, it lacks common sense because you are now putting yourself as the objectifier or the objective measure, measuring subjective things. That's wrong. In sciences other than physical applied physical laws, right? Any other thing, psychology, like this type of thing, psychology, economics, even the tracing of history. This is all bro science. Yes, even history, because it depends on who is explaining it. Besides the actual facts by themselves, who is writing this story or trying to explain those facts are all subject to bias. And so putting themselves as the objective thing without bias is the greatest acclamation or the greatest claim that they are the sole bearers responsible for understanding the world. Like what? Isn't that the biggest need to have face, to claim that you yourself are the sole savior? So this is what I'm saying. And when you actually think about what they have been doing, you have to understand that they have made lots of mistakes through this hypothesis being first. Number one, any racial theory is always wrong because there's an inherent slant or bias to the way that they perceive reality. So everybody knows Charles Darwin. Not so many people know his cousin Francis Galton, who coined racial theories, and basically part of that group based their racial superiority doctrine on the cephalic index. So basically, the way that our human skull is shaped, they said, okay, so the most superior ones is, I think, dolichocephalic. Wait, let me check this. Different races, yeah. So the dolichocephalic skull, which is the long-headed skull, which is apparently in certain types of Europe, it's most prominent. But even that's not entirely true, because apparently it's kind of like a mix depending on which part of Europe. But they claimed that to be the superior race because they had a long skull. So, and then that was the basis. That was a scientific theory, by the way, judging people's head, like phrenology, feeling people's skull for. And so, so there's that. And then there's taking the rooster to court. I went back to Australia quite recently, and I joined a lot of philosophy groups, and they were talking about the way that the world is changing. And I brought this case up of the cockatrice trial, and immediately the white Australians in that group thought this was an Asian thing. And then the leader of the discussion group actually said, oh yeah, but in Asian culture, chickens have this belief that roosters and all that are mythical. And I go, no. It wasn't in Asia. It was in Europe that this trial took place. And then basically he was lost for words. So this is what I was saying. The ability to coin up a hypothesis and then try to prove it right or wrong, in theory, it should work. But in the same way that the Chinese paradigm of just making observations, find a discernible pattern and draw a conclusion works. So why would you pin one to be superior and the other one as like just technology? But clearly, science and technology, it should be on par. But in the Western thought, science is higher. Like it's like it's primary before technology comes forth. Whereas two paths can draw the same conclusion. And this is what I'm saying about the face. Anything that they come up with, they automatically, ipso facto, deem to be superior. So this is what I mean. When you see a comment that says Eastern people, Asian people need face, say no, you guys are the one that need face, to the point where even if you're openly, blatantly wrong, like what's happening right now with Trump, you guys can't even admit. And even after all these years, 500 years of barbaric rule, you guys are still trying to claim that you did all this pillage, plunder, genocide. You're still doing this for quote unquote a good reason because you believed in it. No, you guys are just barbaric. And this is what I was saying. Don't fall for the way that they argue, which is always at first, yeah, the West is not perfect, but it's better than the alternative. This is the current argument that they are making. So if you can't see this bigger point, then you cannot argue efficiently. You do not admit and say, oh yeah, Asians require face because or but. No. You say, no, everyone does. Just name one person who doesn't require face, which means basic respect. in terms of a discourse. Name one person who has normal self-esteem, who doesn't require that. So this is ludicrous. Don't even fall for that line. Please argue using logic. Okay, so now what do we have today? So basically, I wanted to know what is the next game that Asians generally need to play, because I can only advocate for Asians. Something that I know that I am is prioritizing things. So right now we've already made a great harvest, and now we need to prioritize what things we need to do in order to make sure this momentum gathers forth. So over here, you can see what is openly happening. There is new growth in our movement. However, it's going to end up in a lot of gaslighting, okay? Because right now what you see is that the old grounds are being broken. But the West right now is trying to keep the situation, keep it, okay? So what does a taser do? It temporarily stuns, it incapacitates. And during that time, it's going to gaslight the crap out of any other nation that is attempting to rise from this particular power, like shifting dynamic. Okay, so we've still got quite a long way to go. So from this point on, where the old grounds are breaking and drying up, there is still a long way to go in order to get rid of this, especially American consumerism. Okay, so we are still in studying mode. And these are the two things that we have to be most careful of. The revolving door policies of the US, right? As part of this taser strategy. So the people in power, in politics, I mean, if you go to any other country, you will honestly see that people on the ground, I would say most people have already come to a common sense of some sort, which means that they are beginning to understand the fallacies of the Western supremacy model, yet they're not ready to admit that other cultures have models which are on the negative side equally flawed, or on the positive side equally as good, right? So you're going to see more of the West still trying to create this paradigm of, yeah, the West is bad, but, you know, better than the alternative. Because what they are trying to do here is, if you can see this guy, right, it's got an extra nipple. So this means there's something extra going on. Extra gaslighting, extra suspension of everybody who's trying to make an attempt of a rise. So our growth here is definitely to be protected, because we've still got a long way to go. And like I said before, 2026 astrologically is going to mark the biggest shift. So right now what we're seeing is basically a prelude. 2026 is where things are really going to have this maybe clean-cut change. And like I keep saying before, it is going to involve an energy movement, energy liberalization. And I think that definitely is going to come by China and the BRI projects. All right. See you guys later. Enough of my rambling. Even I'm tired of listening to myself. Bye.